Hi everybody, I'm Brian with Fort Knox Company and I'm going to show you how to install your water softener. But this is not just any water softener, this is a whole home filtration system from Shell Water Systems, made here in the US. And in this video, I'm going to cover the whole entire process, step by step, in great detail so that you can install this system yourself. So like I just said, this is a whole home filtration system, which means that it's going to filter the water before it softens the water. It will remove any harmful chemicals, pesticides, and many other products in your water before it softens it, and that's all before it goes back into your house. So I would highly recommend a whole home filtration system versus just a water softener because you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, and it's going to really give you the cleanest water that you can possibly have in your house. And like I just mentioned, Shell Water Systems makes their product here in the US. So that is something that I can really get behind. And I may be a little bit biased because they did reach out to me and ask me to do an installation video for you to show you that it truly is a do-it-yourself project. But I can tell you this, I've installed many different filtration systems, water softeners, and this one really does go above and beyond on all the features and just the way that it's made. It went together very easily. The hardest part is really just picking what type of connections and fittings that you want to use. But after that, everything else is very smooth and easy to set up. And another great feature is the application that they have to run your system. That is something that I never had before, and I was very pleased to find out that it was fast and easy to set up, and it's very convenient to have it right there at the touch of your phone to be able to adjust anything and see how your system is running. But I can go on and on about all the different features that this product has, and I'll cover more of that throughout the video. But I want to jump right into showing you a little overview of how the system connects and how the water flows through it so that you have a good idea of how it all works. So just to give you all an idea of exactly what we're going to be doing here, we're going to have the water coming in from the street. It's going to flow through the system. It's going to go through our whole home filtration tank. It's going to then jump over to our water softener tank. It's then going to come out and down and go through our filter. This is going to pull out any large particles that may make it past any of the tanks or just coming from the street. And then it flows back into the house. This line up here is our drain line. This attaches to the left side of the head unit. When it runs its regeneration cycle, it flushes that water out and it goes out and around and flows right out to the street. You should hopefully have a plug nearby for the power source. We have our power source plugged in to the left side of our head unit. This black line right here goes down to the brine tank. That is where the salt is. Our salt sits down in here. Everything is set up this way. I tried to set it up in the best way to see the flow. Most commonly, you're going to have water that actually flows out from the right and flows back into the left. But I'll show you guys here how to actually find out exactly which way the flow is, because this is probably the only thing that really matters, and it might differ on each house, is making sure that you have the flow coming into the system and the flow going back into the house. My house comes in from the left and goes back in on the right, which is unique. I would say maybe 10% of the homes out there are like this. Most commonly, you should find it coming out from the street on the right, back into the house on the left. And that also correlates to the systems where you're coming in on the right, out on the left, in on the right, and then out on the left. So the system is built to easily attach to the most commonly found setup, which is in from the right, out from the left. But just wanted to show you guys here. I went along and drew arrows so we can follow everything around. I'm going to show you step by step how to complete all of this. This is definitely something that you can do yourself, and I'll help you troubleshoot anything that you might find along the way. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit the like button on the video. This will make sure that you can find the video in the future in case you need to refer back to it, because I know a lot of people like to start and stop the process, or you might have to run to the store and get something, or for whatever reason you need to refer back. It'll make it a lot easier to find the video if you've subscribed to the channel and you like the video. It'll pop up a lot quicker, and you'll also be able to find a lot of the other videos that I make related to water softeners, home filtration, reverse osmosis, and many other types of DIY projects that you can do yourself. So one of the first questions a lot of people have is, which way do I hook this thing up? I know that the water softener and the filtration system has a in and an out, but what does that mean as far as the house? Like what is going into the filter and then out to the house, right? So we need to figure out the water flow. There's a simple, easy way to do that. I do this every time just because I want to double check. They're usually set up in the correct format right here to where it lines up to your water softener system. But I know that my house specifically, it's actually switched. So just to confirm that, the one on the other side that goes to the out is actually my in. And so I'm gonna show you guys, I'm gonna turn the water back on at the valve. And I have some buckets here to kind of catch the water. I'm just gonna turn on a little bit and I'm gonna see where that water starts to flow from. That means that it's coming from the street to the filter and then it's gonna go back out of the filter back into the other side to the house. So I'm gonna turn the water on, we'll see which one starts flowing, and then we know which one should be connected to the inlet, and then which one goes back out to the house. So this one on the left is where the water is coming from the street. It's gonna go into the water filter, and then when it goes back into the house after going through both filtration tanks, it's gonna go back into the house. So into the filter, back to the house. This line right up here is usually gonna be installed with your water loop. This connects to some type of drain. This is the flush when your filtration system is flushing out and refreshing or recycling, or they refer to it as regeneration. It's gonna be flushing out all that water through this drain pipe. It's usually a smaller diameter. This goes up in this wall and it goes over to our laundry room and actually dumps into that laundry drain. Another option if you don't have this, or the way it can be installed if you're having this done, is it just needs to go to an actual sewer drain somewhere. So like right here, we actually have a sink drain. You can actually run this line down and you can actually tap in to a drain and it just needs to go out to your sewer system. And there's different ways to connect that, very similar to like a reverse osmosis. So looking at your water loop is where you're gonna be putting your water softener system. A lot of houses nowadays have these built in from the builder and they actually have the correct water flow and they have usually 1 inch or if you maybe like 3/4 inch, most commonly 1 inch. These here are 1 1/4. So it's just kind of a unique size. So it's a little bit harder to find. So I'll be doing a reducer from 1 1/4 to 1. But what you're looking at here is the water loop. The water is going to come out of the house, go into your filtration system. And then at some point it's going to go back into the house and it's going to have filtered water that branches off then to the hot water source and the cold water sources. So yes, everything in the house, hot and cold, will be filtered, will be softened. So this is your water loop. Another way you might see it is a solid copper pipe, which you would have to then cut and put some type of fitting on. There are solutions for that, like shark bites and those quick connects. A lot of plumbers might not recommend those because they don't like them, they could fail. I personally haven't had one fail. My rule of thumb is if I can see where the connection is and it ever were to fail, like something like this out in the open, I don't mind putting it there because it's not going to be hidden inside of a wall. So I would not replumb a shower or something that's going to be behind drywall with those quick connections, because if they do fail, it's a lot harder to see or get to and it's too late. So I don't mind putting them in places that I can see. So don't worry. I have a couple down here on the sink. You can see here on the sink, I have these shark bites and they just push right onto these PEX lines. Cool thing about these is that it connects from copper to plastic to other different materials. So these are really nice and convenient because you can just push them right on. You don't have to have a torch, you don't have to have solder, and you also don't have to make sure this thing is completely dry and messing with the heat or the flame. These just push right on and then you're ready to go. Another very common connection type are these connection lines. These are flexible lines. You can find them like this. You can also find them in a braided steel. They come in different manufacturers and finishes. They come in different sizes. I've had different ones that are going from 1 1/4 to 1 inch or 1 inch to 1 inch. You can buy them in different lengths, and this is most commonly found and seen. These are actually called water supply lines, but this is very commonly used between these water softeners because you can usually set them up right here in front of the connections and you can go from right to left and you can connect the whole system. But you can obviously keep the system a little bit closer and then optimize the spacing using these lines too. Another great benefit for these, and because they're so commonly found, they're very quick to connect. You just have to have a wrench. They also have rubber gaskets in here, so you don't have to worry about them sealing. As soon as you tighten them down, they seal. And these are very, very common and most often found on water softener systems. These are just some other advanced steps and other options for you to consider, but these ones are the most commonly found, and you can pick most of these up at the store, and you can also find them online. I'll put links for everything that you see here and that I use inside the video in the description below, even as far as more silicone grease for the O-rings that you might have in your system, any other connections, reducers, special fittings, any other parts, the salt, all that stuff. I will put links for everything in the description there below for you so you can find a lot of these pieces. A lot of people like to try to find those special shark bite reducers, and then they'll go from the shark bite connection to these because they want to come off of the copper pipe and then go down to one of these flexible lines. That can all be done, whichever your style is or whatever you prefer or whatever falls within your budget. If you want to do it yourself, there's a lot of different options to do it. I know a lot of people use the push-on fittings, the shark bite type of stuff. That's fine. I'm going to be using PEX A because I have the tool now, and I'm going to show you guys, mainly focusing again on the assembly and the installation of the water softener system. But the first hurdle that a lot of people have is right here at that water loop. What do I do? So there's a lot of options. Don't worry. Everything after this point is smooth sailing. After it's shipped to your house, you're going to have probably 3 boxes if you got the whole home filtration. If you just got the water softener filtration, don't worry. It's the same process, except you don't have to install the second tank. But we're going to unbox both these tanks, and then the brine tank, that larger small tank that holds the salt there. And we're going to get all these out of the boxes, and we're going to set them up and start to kind of see the size of the system and where we want to place it. And one of the first things we're going to do is actually fill the tank for the house filtration. It should be clearly marked on top, and all we have to do is remove the cap, get your garden hose, and fill it in through the top. It should have a little cap over the white tube coming up the center. That's to prevent any water from going down that part right now while you're filling it. So you're going to use the garden hose, and you're going to actually just fill around that tube, and you're going to fill it up about halfway. And one of the cool things is you're going to start hearing one of the pluses I like on this system. They put a lot more matter inside of their products. That's a lot more of the filtration particles, in this case the carbon, or in the water softener it's like these resin beads. They use a lot more of that material, and it's a higher quality material. So when you add the water to this, you'll hear it fizzling and you'll kind of hear it bubbling. You're actually activating that matter, and it's going to have to sit for about 48 hours. And this is a key step in the whole process because you do need to let that sit. Because it has brand new matter inside that tank, it needs to saturate and it needs to soak for a little bit. And this helps get any of that dust or fine particles or dust that's in there. And we're going to end up flushing this thing out on the next step. So fill it with water about halfway, and then we're going to let that sit for 48 hours. Okay, so while that thing soaks, I kind of want to go over some of the features for you. Not only does this soften the water in your house, but like I mentioned already, it is a whole house filtration system. What that means is that the water is going to pass through your first tank, which has the carbon matter in there. That filters out almost 99% of any harmful chemicals like chlorine and chloramine. It filters out any pesticides, anything else that might be large particles or matter in the water. It catches all of that before it even goes to the water softening tank. So that's a huge plus when you're trying to think about any water that might have odors or smells or tastes or anything. It helps reduce or eliminate all of that, and it gives you the purest water that you can pretty much drink from any faucet in the house. So it really does go above and beyond just softening the water. Then it goes through the water softening tank, and that scrubs away the hardness of it. And again, they use more matter in this, so it does a better job of scrubbing that calcium and any hardness in that water, so that not only can you prolong the plumbing in your house, but you can also prolong the life of the appliances as well. It's good for your skin, your hair, and all around you're just gonna have a better experience using any type of water within your house for whatever it is. Even cooking and things like that, or the ice makers, your water is gonna be the purest that it really can be. So it's a huge plus, and a lot of things that people overlook when they're installing a filtration system. They just go for that water softener, and they're not thinking the whole house filtration and the other benefits that that could provide. So this is a huge step up from us because we currently had a water softener, and we're now going to this whole home filtration system. So it's going to be a big upgrade. Another big plus with the Shell water systems is that they use less salt because they have a vortex technology inside of the tanks. This lets the system be more efficient while it runs and uses less salt over the life of the system. And the only maintenance that you have to do is replace the salt once in a while. 7 bags should last you about 8 to 10 months, which is again huge. If you've ever had any other softener systems, you know that you seem like you're probably always adding salt to it. You should be able to use 7 bags and then let it sit for about 7 to 8 months. They also have an app, which is the first for me. The app is very easy to use. It's step by step, and you can monitor all the statistics and all the salt levels within your tank from your phone. So again, that's another big plus, something that we did not have before. And also the only maintenance that you need to do is the salt and then changing that particle filter every once in a while, which I'll have a separate video just showing you an easy step separately how to do that. They give you the wrench and everything to take that canister off down the road, and you just replace the filter. And anytime you need one of those filters, you can contact Shell Water Systems and they'll send it right out to you. So once you've let that sit for about 48 hours, the next step is to go ahead and install the tank head. That should also be labeled the whole home filtration. And then we can move on to the next step, which is actually flushing it. So now that we're ready to install the head unit, we're going to start with our carbon tank. This is where the water is going to first come into. You need to remove this blue cap. So we're going to remove this because this is going to allow the water to come through. We're going to fit the head over this pipe. Remember, once you put this head on and you fit it over the center in the head unit and you start to turn it down, it's actually going to bite down on this pipe. So once you connect this and you get it down very snug, you're not going to be removing this. If you were to try to remove this once it's already secured all the way down, it could cause damage. So that's one important thing, is that once you put this head unit on, it's on there. So starting with the unit that goes on top of our carbon filter, another thing I really like is that these little rubber bushings, or these gaskets right here on the insides, they're already greased up. They have grease inside there. They're gonna have a little bit of like a silicone grease or something. They're already done for you and in place, so that's another plus. Other systems make you actually install all that yourself and grease it up. So these are extra steps that a lot of people don't have to do with these Shell water systems, is that they already give it to you ready to go. So it's literally take the cap off and screw this on and then get your tank in place. And something that I'll do as a little bit of an extra is because there might be some of those particles on the inside of these threads. So when you go to screw it down, you'll hear it grinding. I try to wipe some of that out just to see if we can get some of this out of there. It's not necessarily a problem, but it's just not going to sound good when you actually screw that head unit down. So I'll do everything I can to kind of clean out those threads. So now we're ready to put the head unit on. We're going to line up this tube right here to the center. We're going to push it down until the threads meet. Then we're going to apply some downward pressure and screw it in a clockwise motion for those threads to grab. You can still hear a little bit of that grinding. That's okay. Main thing is that we have the top where this rubber gasket is going to meet. This whole top area is going to be clean because it needs to press down on there and create a good seal. You're going to get this pretty much all the way by hand. And then they say that you can actually take a tool and you can actually use it as leverage. You do not want to pull outside on the outside of these valves. You want to be able to use it from the head of the unit or the bulk of it and get that thing twisted all the way down. It's not going to go until failure. You're not going to actually bottom out this fitting. You just need it to be very snug because these are plastic threads and there's a rubber gasket there that's actually compressing. So you're not going to actually bottom out this head unit. You have a couple different ways to tighten this down. I usually do most of these by hand. If you don't have the arm strength or you want to use something for leverage, you can. They talk about putting a tool in between here. If you want to actually pull this off, you could actually pull this off and then put a tool in here. But I would do something very soft or that has like a rubber edge, and and then you could actually help pull or turn it. But like I said, you can usually do a lot of this by hand. That should be good like that. So these can also be loosened if you need to turn and create that water in a certain direction, because I'm going to have these things connecting to each other. So we're probably going to have something like that where it goes this way over to the next unit. So depending on how we want to do it, you can actually loosen these so it can go down and over, or it can go directly to the next one because these will be at the same height. So these can be adjusted, but once you do that, you want to make sure you tighten it back down. So now that we have our tank head on, we're ready to go ahead and make sure that we hook up the water from the hose going through the inlet, which is marked. You see the arrows I also drew here to show you. This is the inlet. So looking at it from the back, it's actually the one on the left, but if you were to turn this around, it's that right to left, like I was saying. We're gonna flush water through here, and we're gonna flush water out of here for about 15 minutes. That is where These two little adapters come in handy, which is cool that they give these to you because this is really an all-in-one kit. You can truly do this yourself. And they went above and beyond and didn't have you try to figure this out yourself. They give you these. And it's really nice that they give these to you from Shell Water Systems because they are really trying to set you up for success. Makes it really easy to do all these steps and make it as convenient as possible for you guys. So you're gonna hook one of these up on each side. I'll show you how to do that. Then we're gonna hook the hoses up and then we're gonna flush this thing out. And I'll show you a couple different options of where you can actually let this stuff flush out to. Hooking these up is pretty straightforward. You're just gonna screw these on here. Just pretty much hand tight should be good enough because it's going to create that watertight seal there on the bottom. Same thing on this side. Then we can hook our hoses up. This one's gonna come out from the spigot at the house. We're gonna flush the water through here, and then we're gonna flush the water out here. And this is nice because, so rather than just letting the water flush out all over the floor, which I guess you could do, but if you already have this thing in place where you kind of want it, because it does get heavy once you put water in it, you can keep this where it's at. You can just turn it around or even keep it facing the other way. Hook the hose up, and then you can control where the water actually goes out. So for me right now, I might actually let this run right into a shop sink that I have right here, but I could also let this run right outside the back door here in the garage, out into the dirt. You can run this out into the landscaping. You can run it out into the grass. It just needs to go outside somewhere to a drain. So whatever is most convenient for you, depending on your situation. Main thing is that it comes with both these adapters, and it's really nice that we can flush this thing out and then get it hooked up. So now we got the water on here. I can go ahead and open these valves up, let that water flow through and out. And then we'll start to see this come out the other end. I'm just letting it go into a nearby drain here in the sink. This is gonna help flush out any particles, any dust, anything that is inside that resin. And we're gonna let this flush for about 15 minutes. Another thing that's good while this is going on is to make sure that this is not leaking, so you can already tell that your head is on tight enough, that there's no water coming out here, that we don't have any leaking coming out of these connections here. These adapters will come off after once we're done, and then you can either throw them away or keep them. They're worth, a little bit of money if you ever need to attach a hose to another fitting, like a 1-inch plumbing. It's nice to have them. But these here, we can make sure nothing's leaking. And like I said, let it go for about 15 minutes and then we're good. And then once we have these removed, we can start hooking up our fittings, whatever type of connection we're deciding to do, to hook this up to the water softener, the particle filter, and then back to the house. So one of the first things when doing any type of plumbing or work with water in your house is turn off the water to your house. This can be done a couple ways. This valve right here is the main water line that goes into the house, and it's usually somewhere by the front of the garage or somewhere by the front of the house. Most commonly here on the West Coast, you find them in the garage, and this means that water is flowing with the direction of the pipe. So when you turn it the other way, it's cutting it off, so it actually stops the water from flowing there. But another way to do this, in case you don't find this or you're worried about breaking this, because if something like this breaks in your house, it's obviously yours to deal with, but there's a little trick that I learned from a plumber. He said that if you ever want to turn the water off to your house, go turn the water off at the street, because the valve, this valve right here, the front of your house, when you turn that one off, if something were to happen to it and it breaks, it's going to be the city or the county that you live in. It's going to be their responsibility, because that from that point forward is theirs. If you ever turn on and off the water at your house, this is one way to do it. Every house is going to have some type of shut off for the supply. But if something happens to the valve for some reason, like it's an older house, in a case that I was working on another one, the valves are really old, and if something broke inside the house, it would be completely the homeowner's responsibility. If you turn it off here and this breaks, the city comes back out and they replace it, and it's their responsibility. So I thought that was pretty cool when I learned that, because I never thought about it that way. But like I said, the old house I was working on for this other water system, it had some really, really old valves. And I was like, I'm afraid to even touch these things. And he said, well, don't touch them. Turn the water off out at the street. this is why. So that was kind of cool to learn. And because we have the water shut off, there's going to be a lot of pressure and water in the line still. So I recommend going to one of your faucets, letting that water pressure drain, and that releases some of the pressure so that when we go to disconnect these pieces, it doesn't start spraying out as much because we've reduced some of the pressure inside those lines. So I've already shut the water off at the main line. I'm also going to shut it off here. And we can go ahead and make our disconnections. I know that there's still going to be a little bit of water in here, maybe not so much here, but from the house, it's going to be flowing back. So I'm going to disconnect this side, and I have a bucket ready to catch any water. So you might get a little bit wet. You're probably going to be a little bit more graceful than me, but I have an excuse. I'm filming and I'm doing everything with one hand. But if I had both hands available, I'd probably have that bucket a little bit closer and maybe someone holding the towel. So it's all right. It's going to dry up, but don't be afraid. You might get a little bit wet. It's just part of the process. So one thing I want to make sure that I emphasize is that when you are installing this canister for the particle filter, they give you the grease to be able to grease up that O-ring around the top of the rim that you're going to be screwing that canister in. Make sure you put a lot of that grease on there. Don't go light with it. That was one of the things that I've seen when installing these, is that if you think that you just kind of rub it on there very lightly and you go to screw it, you may see that you have a little bit of a leak later on, and then you're going to have to pull out the bucket and kind of undo it because you probably already have water in your system. So it's not really a big deal to have to fix, because I did do that on this one. It had a small leak and all I had to do was tighten it slightly. But I want to let you guys know, don't go light with that grease. It's a silicone grease. It's nothing to be afraid of, but put it liberally around that O-ring, and that should prevent it from having any problems when you install it the first time. So now that we have our particulate filter assembled, we can go ahead and start putting in these male fittings. We're definitely going to be putting the plumber's tape on this. You can see how easily this threads all the way down. We definitely need some tape in there to fill that and make sure that as we're tightening it down, it's getting, we're not going to bottom out the fitting. We need we need those threads to be completely watertight. So we're definitely going to do 4 to 6 wraps of that plumber's tape. We're going to have one of these on both sides, and then we can connect like this through the filter at the end, and then we go back through the house. This as well has a directional arrow of where the water goes in and where the water goes out back into the house. So the cool part about using these flex lines is that if you're doing it yourself, this is pretty quick. Everything goes together. All you need is really a wrench. Set it up close enough for the distances that you have. Like these flex lines come in 12 and 24 and 18-inch lengths. So it's easy just to connect everything together. You screw it all together and then you're done. In my case, I actually have to put on these fittings. I have to screw on the male fitting sides of these PEX A's. Then I have to cut the tubes to length, and I'm gonna have everything kind of fixed in position. So I'll be showing that as well. But if you're using these flex lines, it's even faster and more convenient. I just happen to have the tools and I'm gonna do it this way. But for everybody else out there using these, don't worry, these are actually faster and just as good. So because I am doing copper fittings to some other brass or copper fittings, I am gonna be using my plumber's tape. So I'm gonna do about 4 to 6 wraps on this and then get this in line where I want. And this is gonna be my line going back into the house. And I'm gonna set this up to where my particle filter is, because I wanna make sure that is set in place, and I'm going to kind of base my other 2 tanks off of that, because I'm going to have the longest run back this way, and it has to connect to that particle filter, because that's something that I might have to access pretty often to change the filter. So I want to set this up so I know where I can mount my plate, which I have right here. I'm going to mount this to 2 studs, and then I'm going to bolt my particle filter to that so it's actually mounted securely on the wall. And it's a little bit more permanent. So I want to set that up first where it's convenient between these 2 studs that I've marked, and then I can kind of lay out the footprint from there. So when deciding where to mount your particle filter, obviously we have this bracket right here that needs to bolt into something solid. You're going to need to mount something like a 2x6 on the wall where we can mount that plate. It also doubles as an area later on that we can hang the key to help take off that blue filter and change it out later, or any other parts or pieces that you might need, or even to carry the instructions. I like to hang them up on here like a little hanging board. But get yourself a 2x6, span the width of at least 2 studs. Get yourself your stud finder, locate your 2 studs, which I've already marked clearly here. I'm gonna then pre-drill and screw these on. I'm gonna make it low enough to where I know that the bracket will hold my filter at the appropriate height to connect to my inlet to the house. This is a pretty straightforward process, but just make sure you span at least 2 studs. So I cut this at 26 inches just so I have some room to move the filter across. But I would say make it no less than 20 inches because you're gonna have probably a 16-inch span between here and you want a couple inches overhang. You can do this with any type of wood tapping screws. Find your studs, then we can anchor our particle filter right to the board. So I've already marked my studs and then I pre-drilled where these holes are gonna go so I can make sure that it goes in there nice and smooth. Now we can figure out exactly where we want to mount this. Then we can make our connection for the water going back into the house. So now we're ready to actually mount the particle filter up. This is gonna be my inlet back to the house. So I'm trying to give it the best shot to come from here to here. So I'm probably just gonna mount it somewhere in there and I'm gonna be able to bring the line straight this way. So I can mark these holes here. Then I'm gonna pre-drill these 4 holes and then I can put my short little lag bolts right there and then I can mount this up. I'm gonna have to mount everything in place so I can cut the pipes to be the correct length. But this looks like it should be a pretty good shot to the valve. I don't have to make too much of a bend. Then I'm going to be using these 7/16 short little lags with a washer to hold the bracket on there that holds up that particle filter. Now we have this mounted here securely. I can run my line there. This is probably one of the first connections I make. Right where it's currently at is where it's going to sit. And I'm just going to figure out the angle and length that we need here between these 2 pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and start making those connections now. So now you can see behind me, we have all of our main connections together. This PEX A is nice, but one thing I've learned when using it more now is that even though it's pretty cool that it just like clamps together and you don't have to do any soldering, those flex pipes that actually just screw on and screw off are probably a lot faster because this you have to get comfortable with using. But these things are nice because once it's all together, it's nice and clean. And I'll show you guys here the flow of the water. I even marked some arrows for you, so it's really easy to follow. So here's how our system is going to sit. Everything is mounted on the wall. All the pipes are connected. We obviously still need to connect the line that goes down to the brine tank where the salt is. And then we're going to connect our flush for when it's doing its regeneration. That goes to the drain up there on top. But this is pretty much everything right here. I'll show you guys the water flow. Water comes out of the house, goes into the inlet of the carbon filter. It goes through between the 2 heads, jumps back to this right side, goes in, comes back out. It then goes down and goes over, across over here to the inlet of my particle filter, through the particle filter, and back into the house. So the last couple steps are pretty easy. We're gonna get the brine tank ready. You have to tighten a couple things in there in that salt tank, the brine tank. There's just a couple bolts on the inside, little nuts and screws that you have to tighten. That's gonna be your filling valve right there. It kind of works similar to a toilet valve where it automatically shuts off with a little float. So you're gonna secure the nut and bolt on the inside there. Then I'm gonna show you how to connect the tube from the head of the water softener over there to the brine tank. And that's where it's gonna be able to fill and draw that salt water when it needs to do its regeneration. So once you have everything in here secure, we have the screw back here, that little white washer and nut right there on the back. This is for that drain if you want to hook it up. We can have this here secured. Everything's not wobbling. This right here is a push valve. So we're going to take this black line after we've taken it off of the top head. You're going to feed it through this hole into here, and we're going to feed it right in there. And then I'm going to use both hands and I'm going to actually push it all the way in, and it's going to cinch down. Again, these are those lock rings. It works similar to like the shark bite mechanism. It actually bites down on it. If you ever need to release it, you have to depress this ring on the outside for it to be able to release. So we're going to push it all the way in, and it should go in just about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch at most. Looks like maybe 1/2 inch. And you'll see it kind of get in there and bottom out. And once we have that line secure, we can rotate it, put it off here to the side if you'd like. Some people like to face it there to the back. Put this cap back on. This whole setup right here is good to go. We will be putting salt in this before we start the system, but for now, we can go ahead and put this lid back on. So last but not least is we're gonna hook up our drain line. This is on the left-hand side of our water softener head. You're gonna actually pull this tab right here, pull the head out, and this pulls right out. So when we put this back in, again, we're going to push this back in and put that blue clip. But the reason we're going to take this out is because it's a lot easier to be able to connect the clear line, and they give you a little hose clamp to be able to secure over top of this. So they give you a nice big spool of this drain line here. So you should have plenty enough length to get to a drain nearby. If you have that drain line above your water loop already, you probably only need a few feet of this. But let's go ahead and put this on top. Then we can take our drain valve. We can push this on, get it down over, you want it down over all 3 of these barbs. And then we can go ahead and tighten that down. Just like that. I'm going to reinstall this head and then see exactly what length I need to run it over to my drain line. So when installing this valve back in, remember there's a little circle here on the bottom right below the drain. That lines up with the hole right here below it. So we're going to put the main part inside. And then you push it all the way in and it should sit. Once that's seated all the way in, we're going to then reinsert this blue clip behind it, and this locks it in. Then we can take our drain line, measure it around to here where we're going to be at, because this is going to connect into our house drain, and cut it to length, and then we can use our barbed connector to connect these 2 lines together. So now we have our connection going to our drain. This goes off the left side of our water softener head. This right here is a splice for a 1/2 inch line. These are normally 1/2 inch drain lines. So I'll put a link for some of these adapters, because this is one thing that you might need to buy, just because every house is a little bit different. You can use hose clamps, because this is 2 different rated hoses, but again, this is just a drain line. It's not as critical as these main water lines. This is all graded for the water pressure and for these types of valves and fittings. We normally use just hose clamps over each connection, like you see on the side of the head valve, but you can connect this a couple different ways with common pieces that you can find at your hardware store. And again, I'll put 1/2 inch fittings here in the link below in case you need to order any of these. We're gonna fill the brine tank with some bags of salt. It's gonna take about maybe 6 bags. Most commonly, you'll find these 40-pound bags at your local hardware store. Home Depot, Lowe's. You can find them at Costco. And if I can find them on Amazon, I'll also put a link for these as well. You're gonna go through these ever so often, but to start it off, this thing's probably gonna take at least 5 bags. So we'll fill that up and then we'll get ready to let the water back into the system. We'll check for leaks. So then we can get the head unit set up. And then once this is all set up through our phone and synced and we have all the settings correct for our house, we can run it through its first regeneration cycle. Then in a couple hours, your house will be ready to go and we can set it and forget it. I went through the whole system and just checked one more time to make sure that every valve was nice and tight, because we never know that during the installation that anything was loosened or might not have been tightened back up. Like some of these valves back here, I can turn by hand. So I just want to snug everything tight. You don't want to over tighten these because again, these are all plastic threads, but some of these I did loosen all the way to be able to adjust which angle the valve was at. So make sure you have all of these fittings tightened all the way down, and then we're ready to start turning the system on. We're going to plug in the power source for the head unit, and then I'll walk you guys through the initial setup. We're going to open up all of these valves, let the water flow through it, and we'll be up and running. So make sure that you turn on a nearby faucet and leave it open so that when that water comes through and it starts to push, it's not going to compress any of that air that might be in the lines, and you give it somewhere to exit, and so that will cause it to spit or sputter some air and water out. But that's perfectly fine because we want to be able to ease the water into the system and not overload it too fast. So we're going to turn the water on at the main line, and then I'm going to slowly release it into the system, and we'll start checking everything for leaks. And now we have the water back on at the main. We can slowly start to add pressure to this. We can open up these, let it start filling the system. That's going to let water flow through the whole entire system now. All these valves are open. So far, so good. Start letting a little bit more pressure. If you see any discoloration in the water through the faucets when you first turn them on, sometimes you'll see little air bubbles. That's totally normal. It's just some of the new media that's being soaked, and it's totally fine. It's not harmful at all, and it's very common. So a lot of people do ask what happens when you see that discoloration in the water. It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. It goes away, but it is not harmful. It's just part of the process. So now you can see the valve is fully open. We can follow the water all the way through. We can see all of our connections all the way through the particle filter and then back into the house, and everything is completely dry. So the whole entire system now is fully pressurized, and we're ready to run the first cycle through the head unit, where it's actually going to run for about 2 or 3 hours, where it runs water through into the brine tank, brings it in here to the resin, and it actually scrubs that resin and gets it ready to start softening the water. So that's similar to what it does on its regeneration cycle, is it actually flushes with the salt water. And then once it's done doing that, it flushes everything out through our drain line, and then it's ready to go again. So now that you have the water turned on to your system, really the last step is to install the app, and it's called Legacy, Legacy. You should be able to find it on the App Store, and they do provide you some instructions here that are very straightforward with the system. So I was able to follow those step by step through there. It does provide pictures of the different screens that you'll see throughout the process of setting it up, and it links to your system. So once you install the app will actually recognize that you're standing near your system, and it will start programming that. It will automatically set the time to the time that's on your phone. It will walk you through the different categories like water hardness. And the way that I found that was just by Googling, let's say, Las Vegas water hardness level. And then I could say what type of number I would need to put into that category. You can pick the time that you need for the regeneration cycle, most commonly 2 or 3 a.m. because nobody will be using the water around that time. There's a lot of other little steps in there and you can really customize it. But the coolest thing is that you can keep track of when it does its cycles, what your salt levels are at, and if you want to adjust anything to soften the water a little bit more, or for whatever reason, maybe soften it a little bit less, you can just adjust everything on there. And that was one of the coolest things that I like at the very end here is setting up that app and how easy it is to use. I did not have that on any of my other systems. So again, it really goes above and beyond what I expected, and I love it. So I'm going to show you what you need to do to be able to change this post filter. It needs to be changed about every 9 to 12 months. It's very easy to do. It's just a couple steps you got to follow. When you order your new filter, it should come with a little bit of silicone grease. And like I mentioned already, there's a link for this in the description. This is like a food grade silicone grease, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's definitely needed when we have to re-grease the O-ring that comes in that package when we remove this. First thing we want to do is we're going to shut the water off, either at the valve here in the water loop, at your main valve in the house, or even out at the street. But we do need to shut the water off. And once you've turned the water off, you're going to go to a nearby sink and relieve the pressure out of the water lines by actually opening up the faucet and letting it drain out. You'll see the water pressure reduce and eventually go to nothing. That is to help relieve the pressure in the lines. It makes it a lot easier to remove this canister. Another thing you can do with this little red button up on top here, this is actually a pressure release. Because I have a little bit of water in here, you'll see it kind of let some water out. That's how we also relieve pressure out of here. Because of the pressure, it might create a little bit of suction in there. So by relieving the water out of the lines and also relieving pressure here, it helps make it a lot easier to turn this thing off. And I usually keep a nearby bucket because we're gonna have a little bit of water that's in here. So I would have a bucket and maybe a towel or two because there's gonna be some water that gets out of here. Main thing is that we're letting all that water out of the line before we go to remove this. And when we go to loosen it, just remember lefty loosey, righty tighty. The way that it sits right now, we will be turning it clockwise to loosen it, counterclockwise to tighten it. So once we have the canister removed, we're going to empty out the water, remove the old O-ring. Then you can throw the old filter out and replace this with a new one. You want to rinse out anything you might see inside. So clean this out really quick and rinse it. You'll notice there on the bottom, there's a little hole to line the next filter up with. Make sure you align the new filter centered on that. It will sit down on it. And then we're going to make sure that this is also centered when we go to screw it back on, because there's also a circular valve that needs to go centered over this. So we'll make sure it's sitting straight when we go to put it back in and screw it back on. With our new O-ring, we're going to make sure that we reapply some of that silicone grease. We can rub it all the way around. And don't be afraid to put a lot of that on there, because that's one of the common mistakes I see, is that we go too light with the grease as we're putting it back on. And then we end up having like a small leak, which either you tighten it to stop it, or remove the canister, reapply the grease to the O-ring, make sure there's a lot of it on there. Again, it's food grade, so it's nothing to worry about, but it helps create that seal. And then while you're twisting it on, it also keeps this O-ring from binding. So it makes the surface smooth while you're turning it and creates that seal. So this is centered, this is greased, then we can reapply this. And then again, lefty loosey, righty tighty, tighten it with the wrench. And then we're slowly going to release water pressure back into the system like when we first started it. Ease the valve on, let the water start to come back in, and then we can go to full pressure and we can just check for any leaks. All set, we're done. We have the whole system hooked up. I even have the canister wrench right there hung up right next to it. Everything's set and ready to go. We've already done that first charge of the system and that takes a couple hours, but that's just the first step that we have to do to get the system ready to use. Everything is pretty straightforward through that app. Other than that, if you guys have any questions, please ask them in the comments there below. I'm really good at getting back to all those comments. A lot of times when dealing with these systems, everybody has a unique situation and we can answer those through the comments, get back to you pretty quick. So I'm really good about answering all those comments. I love helping you guys. And if you haven't already, hit that like button on the video. I really appreciate it. Also consider subscribing, because if you need to refer back to this video, it'll make it a lot easier to find. If you're subscribed to my channel, anything that you search will pop up and it will be more likely to find the one that you're looking for right here. So make sure you hit that subscribe button as well, so you can always refer back to this if you need to. So once again, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next build.